Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Walking Down the Warwick Road, episode 17. Looking back today at United's 1990 FA Cup run.
Tim, you're frozen.
Can you hear me now, Pete?
Yes, we can. Yes. Are we live?
We're live. And I was just saying to the people, we are back with a bang. We've been out of it for a couple of months, but episode 17, back looking at United's 1990 Cup run. Pete, how have you been?
Very well, thanks, Tim. Very well. Been enjoying the United's play at the moment. I'd say we're inching back to greatness, inch by inch. Yeah. And I'm sure we'll go forward a foot or two, maybe go back an inch or two here and there. But I think there's early signs that this guy knows what he's doing.
Yes, indeed. And joining us as always, of course, is our resident guest, Roger Gardner. Roger, it's been a couple of months. How have you been?
I've been good too. Also, I think the team have heartened me a bit lately. I know we have the setback against City, but our form apart from that has been much improved. And I think looking at 1990, which we're going to do today, it just goes to show how low United dropped. And I don't think the current United are near that 1990 level, if you want my honest opinion.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
Indeed. Right. Well, like we said off the top, we're in it as our trailer that went out this week, narrated by Pete. Tremendous job doing that, my friend. Lots to get into today, certainly in the cup run itself. But Pete, maybe could you just set the scene for us? Where were United coming into this? With the FA Cup run starting in January. Take us through the events that led up to the cup run. Where United was.
Sure. And not normally we'd start right away with the cup run in any other year we were doing, but this cup run proved so pivotal, I think, in United's modern history. And it was a very difficult period. One of those difficult periods that if you get through it, you're stronger, and if you don't, you could be relegated football wise. But if we go back to the final months of the 1980s, the football landscape for United supporters was desperately bleak. And I'll just cover it. I'll cover it briefly, but it's not for the squeamish. So look away, those that are of a nervous nature. We'd not even had a sniff of trophies for 4 years by 1989. Poor performances were becoming the norm on the pitch. The crowds were declining. I'll come back to that in a sec. No league title for 22 years. Can you believe that? Just on a wider level, English clubs were still banned from European adventure following the dreadful events at Heysel. And what made our misery more unbearable was the relentless success, I think, of our rivals, Liverpool and Everton. The league title went to them relentlessly during the 80s, as Merseyside dominated English football, sadly. As we approached Christmas 1989 itself, it was about to get darker still. We were on our sixth manager by then, after Matt Busby, who'd made United English and European champions. And we'd won 3 FA Cups, 1 under Tommy Dock, 2 under Ron Atkinson. But we yearned by then to land the title. We thought we should be the best club in England. And you proved that by winning the league. Alex Ferguson had been in place for 3 years. He'd got us to 11th, 2nd and 11th in his first 3 seasons. And in those first few years, he bought quite a few players. Viv Anderson, Bruce, McClare, Hughes, Leighton and Donaghy. But we'd still only finished 11th in that 88-89 season. So in the autumn of that year, so in the late summer of that year, he bolted on another 5 players, almost the cream of English football, to those that he'd already bought. And he added Neil Webb, Paul Ince, Danny Wallace, Gary Pallister and Mike Phelan, all for massive fees in the day, you know. That influx of new players for the start of 89-90 season really raised expectations. You know, we got to fever pitch because we thought, right, we're on our way back now. But after a decent start in the first half a dozen games, United's form and results just fell away badly. A 5-1 defeat at City, 3-0 defeat to Spurs in the League Cup. We lost to the bottom club, Palace. It was awful. We would go 11 games from early November to mid-Feb without a win. We drew 5, we lost 6. In those 11 games, we scored 5 goals. So those facts just tell you how bad it was. And it wasn't like the performances were good, but we were unlucky. The performances were dire, really. The attacking football had gone AWOL. Anyway, in the midst of all that, round about Christmas 1989, I'd certainly given up on him. I held the banner up saying he should go. But there was a draw for the FA Cup, and I think it was the same day as I'd held the banner up against Palace, and we'd lost 2-1 to, as I say, the bottom club. United were drawn against Forest away. Now, in those days, Forest under Cloughy were a very good cup team. Between 88 and 92, they'd been in 6 finals and won 4 of them. So it wasn't looking good for Fergie. He was really up against it. Under fire from his own fans, from the pundits and from the media. Fortunately, Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, was only 13 at the time. Otherwise, there's no doubt in my mind that Fergie would have gone had it been in today's world. The board stood by him, but I think we all knew that a cup defeat would have ended United's season in January if we'd have lost in that 3rd round. And given the expectation and the money that had been spent, that was unacceptable. So the BBC selected our 3rd round tie against Forest on the 7th of Jan as their live game of the weekend. There's no doubt they smelt blood, and they wanted to provide the viewers with a very public execution of the manager, I think. The odds were stacked against us. We had no Brian Robson, no Paul Ince, no Danny Wallace, no Webb. So that was 3 of his big signings, plus the main guy, the captain, Brian Robson. But we held an ace card at Forest that day. Even though the fans were annoyed at Fergie and upset at Fergie, they still get behind the team, still get behind the club. And Forest gave us an allocation of 7,000. The total attendance was over 23,000, so we had a third of the crowd that was in there. And United fans knew our backs were against the wall, and they knew all the fans and the media were salivating over, how bad things were. And for 90 minutes, they got behind them superbly. The game wasn't a classic. Both defences were on top in the first half. Pallister was brilliant for United that day, one of his first really good games for United. And Des Walker was starting for Forest. He was a superb defender. Anyway, 11 minutes after the break came a goal. I don't know if you're going to play it right away, or I'll just describe it in words to start with, Tim. But 11 minutes after the break, a goal came out of nowhere that would actually change the face of English football for the next 23 years. And though I am prone to a bit of exaggeration sometimes, there's no exaggeration there. So there's a throw out by the Forest keeper, and their fullback struggled to control it. Lee Martin nicked in, our fullback, passed it to Mark Hughes, and about 35 yards out from the goal, sort of in a diagonal from the corner of the penalty area, he swerved the ball in with the outside of his right boot behind the Forest defence. The ball bounced up and sat up perfectly for Mark Robins to race in and just nod the ball over the line. I don't know if you want to show that now, Tim.
Yeah, let's take a look at the goal.
By Martin. Hughes, he's got a lot of room. And here's Robins. And did it get the deflection? Was it Robins or Pearce? But Robins for sure will claim it. Well kept in here by Martin. Hughes had more room than probably at any stage in the match. Just played it in. Robins was unmarked. Pearce tried to come in on the far side. Definitely the goal scored by Robbins. The challenge was slightly from behind by Pearce. And really, Forest were totally asleep. Hughes was given room, and Robbins, the scorer, was not marked. Manchester United have a 1-0 lead.
So it was only Mark Robbins' fourth start for United. He was only 20. He won the game with that goal. He kept United's season alive, and he kept Fergie in a job for at least another couple of weeks. And I just stress again, in the remaining 30 minutes, the support from United's fans along that far side opposite the cameras, 7,000, was absolutely something superb. It was that Manchester swagger that kicks in when we come out fighting, when we're under the cosh. It's a defiance that is very much particularly Manc, and particularly United Manc. But it takes a strong manager with real guts to engineer a victory. Fergie was definitely drinking in the last chance saloon. And I think the fat lady was singing as well, if I might use that expression. But by God, he stood up to it that day, Fergie, and he lived on to fight to the next round.
Tremendous stuff. Roy, Roger, anything to add to the third round tie against Forest?
Yeah, I mean, it was good to get a bit of justice, actually, because I don't know whether Roy agrees with me, but I'm sure. Was it Brian McClare's header or Steve Bruce's header at Old Trafford in '89? I'm sure that went over the line. I'm sure it was. But, Fergie had copped it from Cloughy a number of times because, of course, Cloughy had won the European Cup twice at Nottingham Forest, and he used to rub that into United's wound because, of course, we hadn't done it since '68. So you knew you'd get a difficult game with Brian Clough always.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say, a great summary, Pete, as always. The only thing I would say is that there's no question that was a pivotal match for Alex Ferguson. And I think we commented before, I think we do need to put on record what he then achieved from that match, effectively, or certainly when we won the cup that year. I mean, he's just like, well, you wouldn't even dream it probably. But up to that game against Forest, there'd seriously been 18 months of failure, to be honest, considering the money of the day that was being spent. It just wasn't good enough.
People used to say in that era, you need a year to assess what's going on, a year to make changes, and then a year to make progress. They used to say managers needed 3 years, and actually, if you look at what Fergie did in his first 3 years, we weren't far wrong, really, were we?
No, it started going wrong in '88-9, didn't it?
It did.
I mean, he stabilised after Atkinson, and then he came runners up. We must remember that. But then he did have the type of money to spend, and the City 5-1 defeat was like, wow.
Could I just give you one little known fact about that goal? Obviously, it was scored by Mark Robbins, his first for United. Mark Robbins had been scoring quite regularly for the reserves in '89-90 in that season. But 3 months before that famous cup game, he'd played for United's second 11 at the City ground, and he scored the only goal of the match in a 1-0 win for United with a header early in the second half.
Woo! Do.
Spooky, eh? Spooky. Carry on.
Spooky. Right. Well, if you listen to, I was saying to you lads, and you'll know if you listen to Martin Edwards and Bobby Charlton, they'll both say that he wasn't under the pressure that was made out to be, but certainly was under pressure. And whether you hindsight's 2020, so whether you believe or give a lot of stock to that statement. He certainly was under pressure, and that certainly saved him for sure.
The other thing I'd say, Tim, I don't know if you remember, Michael Knighton was in the background at that time as well, and he fancied Howard Kendall because Howard Kendall was winning trophies, of course, wherever he was. And I'm sure he'd gone to City by this point, but I'm sure Howard Kendall was lined up.
Interesting stuff. Well, Roger, it's a good segue over to you for the for round 4.
Yeah, thank you. And Hereford, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I often say on my Twitter feed, I wouldn't mind going back to the bad old days, really. The days when you could walk into Old Trafford, and stand for less than a fiver. There you can see the team that we put out against Hereford. So we went into this game with injuries, as I'll show in a minute. So just before this game, we were actually in a worse state than we were actually in the league when we went to Nottingham Forest. We'd lost the previous game at Old Trafford to Derby County, and Steve Bruce upended Dean Saunders and got sent off. So we lost against Derby, and then we went on the road to Carrow Road to Norwich and lost. So United were actually in the middle of their worst spell since 1972. When Frank O'Farrell was in charge. So we went to this game fourth from bottom in Division 1 to play the team fourth from bottom in Division 4. So you can see from the team there's no Mike Phelan, no Brian Robson, and Neil Webb was a long-term absentee this season because he picked up an injury on international duty doing his Achilles tendon. I think it was against Sweden. And United had really looked at him, I think, to be the future creativity in the side and the long-term replacement for Brian Robson. Well, Hereford, as I say, were fourth from bottom themselves, but they turned out in numbers. Nearly 14,000 people packed their little Edgar Street ground, and they'd actually got quite a record for cup shocks. They'd knocked Newcastle out in 1972 that sort of forced John Motson onto our screens, and there were two famous goals, and the crowd ran onto the pitch, and it was a typical cup tie. I think if we drew them today, you'd see pretty football on quite a nice pitch. We'd pass it round, and eventually we'd probably win 3 or 4-0. But actually, this wasn't like a modern cup tie at all. They scrapped for absolutely everything during this game. Mark Hughes was putting himself around the pitch as only Mark Hughes could, really, and they were sort of putting it out to Mark Hughes as well. And the pitch was very lumpy. It was like a farmer's ploughed field, and United really struggled to get anything useful in from wide positions. I never really felt Viv Anderson at this stage was the player he was for Arsenal. So United actually had Clayton Blackmore and Danny Wallace wide, with Paul Ince in the middle alongside Mike Duxbury. A United stalwart, really, that had been there from the time of Dave Sexton. And I think it just goes to show guys just how much Fergie was scraping the barrel to get some experience in the team to get through this tie. Jim Leighton as well had an awful game, and he looked really uncomfortable. And in other podcasts, we've actually lamented the fact that Peter Schmeichel was brilliant, and of course before him Les Seeley. Leighton in this game looked really shoddy, and he was bundled off the ball and dropped the ball, and there were scrambles inside the penalty area. However, the game sort of proceeded in this awkward nature for 85 minutes when Duxbury himself almost had a Brian Robson moment. He picked up the ball, ran through the penalty area and pulled it down to Clayton Blackmore, who tapped it in, and United were out of jail, and they won the game 1-0. Just at the point, really, when Hereford must have been looking forward to a replay and a match at Old Trafford. Although, I've got written down here, I don't know what sort of crowd that would have drawn at Old Trafford, because crowds were easily down around the 31,000 point. And television, summed it up pretty nicely at the end. They said United were still in the cup. So those knives that were being sharpened at the City Ground had certainly gone as far as Edgar Street, chaps.
Good summary. Let's take a look at the goal.
Hughes. Again, a lovely turn by the Welsh international. Oh, it's Duxbury, the captain. Is he going to do the captain's job? He is. Clayton Blackmore. And in the end, it looked easy. But what an important contribution by Mike Duxbury. He hasn't played from the start of a game since October. And Elliott beaten. And there is hardly time. Well, 5 minutes left. What a smile lighting up the face of an old campaigner, Mike Duxbury.
Yeah, That was a point I'd written down. Actually, was do you know who was United's captain that day?
Yeah.
And it was
Yeah.
Mike Duxbury.
I'm sure I read somewhere that Mike Duxbury actually preferred to play in central midfield. Was that true, Roy?
Well, to be honest, he was a bit like Gary Neville in that when you first saw him, he had the makings of a top class centre half playing off a big bruising centre half. You know, the way he read the game and he could pick the ball up and everything. But he couldn't get into the United side in that position. And of course lack of height. And I always thought he did well. I mean, how many games did he play for England? He played quite a few for England, and you know, a very good club man, and the sort of player that he's never really regarded. But you know, he wore the red shirt, which we would have all dreamed of doing, and he wore it with distinction. He won honours, and he tried his best. And you know, that's the first requirement from my point of view. We move on from there, and you know, I think Duxbury was a heck of a United club man.
Right, Pete.
Just got Tim, a couple of memories from that game.
Oh, the ball.
For me. Well, first of all, come to the ball. Wait for it. That pitch certainly looked as if it did a herd of bulls gone across it. But it was a 1 o'clock kickoff, and it was on a Sunday again. This was when Sunday football was still quite new in the UK. But that weekend, there'd been what became known as the Burns Day storm. There was a hurricane-force wind that hit, well, a lot of Europe, but Britain had 104-mile-an-hour winds. 97 people were killed over that weekend because of damage the storm caused. So it was very unusual. The messages from the authorities were only travel if you really, really have to. Anyway, me and the lads that I knocked around with then decided an FA Cup tie United were playing in was essential travel. So we set off and we made it. But when we got to a certain point, just where you go over to Herefordshire, all we could see as we came to this high hill was the water flooded Herefordshire, parts of South Wales, Worcestershire. We didn't think we'd make it to the match, and if we did, the match wouldn't be on. But in the end, it was on, but it was real touch and go. And anybody that was there that day ended up wading through puddles almost the size of lakes, you know, just in and around the ground. But the other thing was the mascot. They had a mascot called Billy the Bull, because they were called the Bulls. Hereford's famous for Herefordshire Bulls. Now, nowadays, that would be a man or a woman dressed up in a furry costume, prancing around the track. But Hereford had a real bull, and it was a huge bull. I don't know much about bulls' weight, but apparently in the programme it said it was 800 kilogram of prime Herefordshire beef, and it was a fine specimen. And they took it round the pitch. Well, it got dogs abuse or bulls abuse, I guess, to United supporters. But I've never seen that at a game before, and so it was something that was memorable from the time. I did do an article about that game some time ago, and I found out that while Fergie went on to live another day, and Hereford went on to win the Welsh Cup that year, it wasn't such good news for Billy the Bull.
Oh no!
Apparently, he had to be put down in 1999 after breaking a leg whilst mating with a cow.
Well, what a way to go, guys! I mean, I know.
I just want to stress, all of that's true. It's not a cock and bull story.
Let's move on, Chairman. Move on.
Another interesting tidbit from that game is I understand that the pitch was in a really bad state. That the game was it was unclear as to whether or not the game was going to go forward the day before because of the pitch, I think I'd read. And so tremendous stuff there. Thank you very much, Roger. And bad news on Billy the Bull, but we move on.
Yeah.
Right, back to back. Roger, you're up again for round 5. Where are we going for round 5?
So round 5 was on the 18th of February. Again, it was live on television. You can see that we were able to bring back some of our more experienced players. Duxbury still there in midfield, although Mike Phelan was back. Robbins and Mark Hughes up front. You've got McClare out wide. I thought they may have gone 4-3-3 that day, but I think that's actually right. Again, Jim Leighton was in the United goal. So, I mean, what I would say, remembering this game, I've actually got all these cup games on VHS video. However, they don't last 22 years. And when I watch them back, all the players look as if they'd eaten ready bread because they'd all got red glows around them, and the ball had turned pink. So I gave up watching them. But it was a better game of football. It was certainly on a better pitch. And Ferguson came up against Jim Smith, who'd been appointed following Newcastle's relegation. So Newcastle were in the old Division 2, but some of Ferguson's old stalwarts were there. So Mark McGee, who Ferguson had at Aberdeen, was in the Newcastle team. Mickey Quinn, central forward, of course, he'd been around the club, so he was at the Magpies. Ray Ranson, the fullback, United fans may remember from Manchester City, and they actually called on Roy Aitken from Celtic to go into Newcastle's midfield. And the other player that I can't ever quite forgive is Kevin Brock. So he was in Jim Smith's team. He'd played at Oxford. And if it wasn't for Kevin Brock's back pass that let Everton in, I think Howard Kendall would have lost his job in 1984. Anyway, United had only won once since Hereford, and that was when Mark Hughes scored a late goal to beat Millwall. But things started pretty well for United, actually. A typical poacher's goal from Mark Robbins on 20 minutes really gave United optimism, and the United fans in the Lees end of St James's Park went absolutely crazy at that goal. So, people who think today that the FA Cup didn't mean anything, I can tell you that in 1990 it still meant a hell of a lot. So that was United 1-up, and that's how the scoreline stayed pretty much until half time, when I don't know what was going on with Steve Bruce in these days. Again, he made a terrible challenge on Mark McGee inside the penalty area, upended Mark McGee. The referee awarded a penalty straight away, and his former sorry, I'll get it right. Mark McGee was up against his former goalkeeper in Jim Leighton, and Jim Leighton obviously didn't remember how Mark McGee took penalties because it was stuck to Jim Leighton's left and he didn't even get near it. So that was Newcastle back in the game. However, Danny Wallace, who I was always a bit mixed on Danny Wallace because I'd quite grown to like Lee Sharp, but Lee Sharp was out of favour by this stage in the United team, and of course prior to him was Jesper Olsen. But Danny Wallace actually put in a really good stint in this particular game, and a lovely goal we'll see in a minute where he screwed the ball in from a tight angle, thanks to a great ball from Brian McClare. However, Newcastle weren't done at all. Mickey Quinn flattened poor Jim Leighton for Kevin Scott to knock in the loose ball that I think took a deflection off a United player. So that was 2-2. However, Brian McClare was able to end his goal drought with 12 minutes to go, and he knocked in what was to be the winner. United won 3-2. And I think I'll remember this really for two things, this game. What a lovely ball that was from Paul Ince to give United that chance. And it was a great finish from Danny Wallace. So I think United deservedly threw in this game. It was a better game of football. And I think after this game, I started to believe that actually we could do it and we could go to Wembley. And I think for me then, the belief really started.
Indeed. Let's take a look at the goals.
Near post. Henderson just on the edge of the 6-yard area. And they all miss it except Robbins. It's in. Robbins has done it again. 17th goal of the season, which will really lift the noise around St James's Park. It does. Anderson, McClare, Stimson for company. Wallace! Yes! Oh, what a finish! What a finish! Right on the hour. Hovering around the penalty spot. And he's down. And the ball is in. Kevin Scott. Ince looking for Wallace. And may have found him. Little touch, McClare! At last, McClare scores. 17 games without a goal. He's chosen a very good moment to end the drought.
It was the 5-goal thriller at St James Park.
I may have got my dates wrong here, but did Gascoigne play it then, or had he gone to Italy?
He'd gone, I think. He'd gone to Spurs.
Oh, sorry, Spurs. Yeah, Spurs.
Yeah.
Pete and Roy, any other anything else to add to the 5th round tie?
No, I think Danny Wallace was shown in good light there. I mean, it's tragedy that what happened to him. It's prolific at Southampton. This old fad of how big it actually is to come and play at Manchester United, cannot be disregarded. I mean, I spoke to Mickey Thomas many a time on it, and he said you would not believe the fear factor that it puts in you when you look around and think, wow, look at them play. And then you think, wow, look who's walked through that door over the time. And now I'm suddenly outside left for Manchester United. And, it's psychological, a lot of it. And but these are, good players who react in different ways.
I think it's hard to go to a team that isn't winning as well, Roy.
Yeah. Absolutely.
He certainly had a tremendous impact on this cup run.
Danny Wallace, that was his best game for United that I saw. The game at Newcastle. He really led the line well. And once again, fantastic support from United supporters there behind the goal. Not easy to go to Newcastle in numbers and come away unscathed.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. We're just going to touch briefly on the 6th round tie. And so United away again started this campaign interestingly as well. I don't think we've mentioned it yet with 4 away ties. So tremendous, tremendous record away from home, certainly in the first 4 ties. But 29th minute, Brian McClare pops up with the winner. There's the team sheet, as you can see. Again, Robinson, Hughes up front, Wallace, Phelan, Ince, McClare across the middle, and Lee Martin, Viv Anderson, Stevie Bruce, and Gary Pallister, and Jim Leighton. Familiar faces for sure. We'll take a look at the goal.
Hughes and Robbins is onside. Can he pull it back? Corner. I thought it went out for a goal kick. So did Stancliffe. So did Tracy. And so did a lot of the Sheffield United fans behind that goal. Wallace. Good back header. McClare against the bar, and then McClare on the rebound from the corner. And so they will be wanting to know, was that really a corner or was it a goal kick? Let's have a look at the goal itself. McClare's header, and then his left foot. And that's his 3rd goal in 4 games.
It's a bit of a scrappy goal, but chalky there, off the fingertips of the keeper onto the bar, and then able to slide it home with his left foot. Anything to add to round 6, lads, before we move on to the semi-final?
It shows football was much better without VAR, because, I mean, initially that did look very close. And funnily enough, going back to the Forest game in round 3, when Lee Martin played the ball into Hughes. That was very close to being a throw-in, and that was just the flow of the game. And now, we've gone on to this now micro checking, and I can't get over it. I'm sorry to go off piece, but I can't get over that Rashford thing last week. I mean, Everton never even complained. It was no one near anyone else. He didn't really juggle the ball to make better advantage, and then you hear that if he'd have passed it, whether it was handball or not, it wouldn't have made any difference. So I mean, that's just balmy, and it just shows those little inches of luck that go your way.
Yeah, indeed.
I was going to ask Pete, could he actually see the goal? Because the away end at Sheffield United, I remember, had stacks and stacks of pillars. Am I not wrong, Pete?
No, you're right about the Sheffield United was like that. I mean, for a long time, Sheffield United only had 3 sides to the ground because they shared the ground with Yorkshire Cricket Club. The first time I went there in '67, I was amazed. There was a quarter of the ground missing. The ground as in the stand, etc. But then they closed it off and got 4 sides somewhere in the 70s. But the away end was always lots of pillars, very difficult. That in itself wasn't easy. You talked about, you've kind of skipped over it, Tim, in that it wasn't there wasn't much to talk about from that game. It was a scrappy game. Actually, all these games we've covered, given that we're at the halfway stage, none of them did United win in style or comfortably. They were all quite hard, not just hard fought, but scrappy, untidy games. It was a feature of United's play in that season. It's just that in these cup games, they managed to scrape wins, whereas in the league, against the top clubs, they were hard to come by. So Hereford were in the 4th tier then. Newcastle were in the 2nd tier. Sheffield United in the 2nd tier. Up to this point, we'd only played Forest from the top flight. So he had a bit of luck, Fergie, even though they were all away games, as you say. And sorry, perhaps just one final thing. I noticed when Roger said this one was on television as well. We say that, us older guys and gals, because nowadays every match is televised. So you think, well, why would you mention that it's on television? But there was only one game a weekend then showed live at best. And that had only just come in 5 or 6 years before. So just put up with the older gen, whatever gen we are. And in that, when we say it was on a Sunday and it was because it was live TV, it was a rarity that. So it just shows that even in our bad times, the media, the TV still wanted to show Manchester United, whether it's our glory years or whether we're struggling.
I'll just read out one quick comment here on Twitter from Tony Peacock. Remember, a couple of us at work photocopying the Sheffield United tickets and coloring the copies in with yellow highlighter markers, presumably to get into the away end, of course. Try to make themselves a ticket.
Could possibly condone such behaviour, but well done.
Right. So sliding past the sixth round and into the semifinal. Of course, a replay in the semifinal, but the first game of the semifinal. Over to you, Roy.
Yeah, I was then, by then, gents. I mean, you think 1990? That's 32 years ago. It doesn't seem 32 years to me, but then I was in my 35th year in 1990 of watching United. So the semi-final against Oldham Athletic, a second division side, as Pete has mentioned there, played at Main Road, so at least the old ground there got a decent crowd in it. And of course, from a stats man's point of view, which I'm not, of course, it was a 2-2 draw, and the game went to extra time and finished up at 3-3. But the big story really before this was, before kickoff, was when Liverpool had got sensationally beaten that dinner time, 4-3 by Crystal Palace at Villa Park. A side that they'd beaten in the league 9-0 that season, by the way. So without Liverpool, surely United would take second division Oldham and then move on confidently to face Palace at Wembley. But not so. Oldham had proved the success story of the season, and they'd already reached the Littlewoods Cup final, which is the League Cup, of course. So had chance of appearing in both English finals in that season. For United, it was easily the biggest game of a very poor season so far, albeit the cup run had lifted the morale. But Fergie, in fairness, was never afraid of throwing the dice, and he picked both Brian Robson and Neil Webb, who'd hardly played. Certainly, Robson hadn't played since Christmas, and Neil Webb had only played once, I think, in the new year. So they were hardly that fit, I would have thought. For Oldham, they lined up with former United starlet Andy Ritchie, like Robbins, only perhaps more so. Who was having a great season. They also had a certain Dennis Irwin playing for him, who many clubs was very interested in this fullback. There was a dramatic start. Unfortunately, from United's point of view, it was when Earl Barrett, who was a former City player, scored for Oldham after 6 minutes, with Jim Leighton not inspiring confidence. And I think it's gone through the talk so far. I think Roger mentioned it at Hereford. It was starting to get a bit worrying. Although I think Billy the Bull might have put him off a little bit. But he wasn't. He was definitely a bag of nerves, really, and he was certainly at fault in that first goal. But we had got our captain back, and and when you want an hero, Brian Robson, in those first 35 years of watching United, and the following 32 after, there's not been a bigger hero than Brian Robson, a man who epitomises what a Manchester United player, and certainly a Manchester United captain, should have been. So he came and scored a typical equaliser after about half an hour. And the second half started really slowly. Indeed, Oldham were playing, slightly the better. But with only 17 minutes left, Neil Webb scored a really unlikely header to put United 2-1 up. And hopefully, that was going to be it. But 5 minutes later, Ian Marshall just volleyed home and Oldham equaliser. And wow, we were into extra time. And it has to be said, a match really of a lot of mistakes. But again, when Danny Wallace broke through the defence and of Oldham and made it 3-2 early in the second half, surely United were going to hold on this time. But again, not so. With only 10 minutes left of extra time, another Leighton hesitation allowed another former City player, Roger Palmer, to equalise. Overall, I suppose for the neutrals, an exciting cup semi-final, 6 goals, but not enough class on show on either side, really. And there was certainly not enough to show between the expensive United side and an Oldham side who were really on a cusp of a wave. They did extremely well, but they were in for like a treble there because the second division, they were doing well. And Joe Royal was most definitely the happier of the two managers, him and Fergie being really good mates. But it summed United up. A game, confidently, they should have won by a couple of goals. But in all honesty, Oldham did deserve the draw to take it to a replay, which would again be at Main Road. But with Crystal Palace there waiting for us in the final. And I think it's really apt that this whole story, and not just keep praising my very good friend Pete, but everything goes back to Crystal Palace. It goes back to the December Crystal Palace 2-1 defeat when we were winning 1-0. Out came the bedsheet, and there we are, back with Crystal Palace. Chance of Crystal Palace in the final. Surely the replay, we were going to take advantage of it and get ourselves to win.
Brilliant. Let's take a look at the goals from the first semi-final.
Into the second division side. Oldham will take it. Marshall on the near post. Oldham again. Tried to change the angle. Oh, an awkward one, and Ballot! Bruce. And Robson! It's 1-1. He's done it again. Including a replay, that's 4 semi-finals. Slightly stubbed it, but it comes to Gibson. And it's Webb. Irwin. Redfern got away. It's good cross. Marshall! By McClare. Useful for Wallace. Test of his pace, now test of his finish. And he's equal to both. That's what you call a good recovery. Milligan. Yes, the space here for Marshall. And Palmer's far side. It's all square.
So 3-3.
Certainly Leighton wasn't commanding his 6-yard box, was he?
No.
That's why I was shaking my head.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yeah. Roger, anything else, or any of the lads, anything else to add to the Oldham to the first game?
I mean, I was shaking my head at Leighton there. I mean, he just didn't read that situation at all. I mean, and that was a theme in just about all of the games. I don't know how he kept his place. I really don't.
Watch this space, Roger.
Yes.
Great. Well, that set up a FA Cup final replay in the semi-final on April 11th, 1990. Again, there's the team. And after a second game, this will be second of 3 on the trot that went to extra time during this cup run. Former United man Andy Ritchie popping up with a goal for Oldham in this one. Was with United from 1977 and 1978. Scored 2 hat-tricks and then was sold. Somewhat surprisingly, I would say. You lads can maybe comment on that after, but yeah, then McClare and Mark Robbins in extra time on the 114th in the 114th minute. Oldham actually hit the bar 3 times in this game, and just about at the end, just almost shaved an equalizer with a bit of a pile driver of a shot, and so. We'll go to the goals.
Still Robson. Wallace. Robson just inside. Give it me back. He's screaming to be giving it back. Wallace. Oh, he's going to go in. Yes, McClare. Brian McClare. Is that going to be another crucial goal in the FA Cup? Scored the winner in rounds 5 and 6. Brian Robson, who started the move. Wallace, it got a little nick. And there was McClare, all alone. Not given. Holden's cross, it's a bit short. And it runs to Ritchie! Andy Ritchie! The man who began his career as a teenager at Old Trafford. Sudden increase in impetus again. Phelan. Robbins! Yes! What a remarkable record this young man has got. His 3rd goal in the FA Cup. And again, Alec Ferguson's side is within touching distance of Wembley. Took 2 touches, and then it was a direct hit rather than a hit shot. Scored against Nottingham Forest. Scored up at Newcastle. Scores against Oldham Athletic.
Tremendous stuff. 3rd goal in the competition for Robbins. Anything to add to the semi-final before we take the trip to Wembley?
No, I think John Allsworth in the Oldham goal was trying to impersonate Jim Leighton there. I mean, the pair of them were really a dire display of goalkeeping.
Indeed. Right. onto the again a replay in the final, but onto the first game. And over to you, Pete.
Yeah, sure. We're back at Wembley. United are back at Wembley, which is always brilliant. We'd not been to a final for 5 years, having had a couple in the 80s and 3 in the 70s. Hallelujah. And as you alluded to before, Liverpool had gone out. At that time, sadly, Liverpool were one of the strongest teams in England and Europe. So for them out the way, we didn't just expect to win it, but we thought we had a good chance. Just one thing, by the time it got to the final, the season had finished. And I know the four of us have said how bad a season it was, and people listening might think it's overkill. But in the end, United finished 13th in the league that season, and Palace has finished 15th. But they were both on 48 points in the league, 13th and 15th. That was only 5 points ahead of relegated Sheffield Wednesday. So wow. just think on that for the second. That's how close Manchester United were to being relegated under Fergie, having spent all that money. So we're not exaggerating. In the league, it had been an absolute season from hell in terms of performances and results. But hey, hallelujah, with a chance to win the cup, get our hands on a trophy, always great. And a great day out at Wembley, of course. Stevie Coppell, a great hero at Old Trafford, was now the manager of Crystal Palace and had revitalised them. I thought United looked superb in all white. There's some kits that really stand out. I'm not a big kit man. I don't collect kits, but all white, United looked great in that final in 1990, just as they did a year later in Rotterdam. But that's just maybe a fashion thing. Fergie now had Robson and Webb back, two of his key midfield men, and he'd moved Paul Ince to right back for this final, the first time he moved into the full back. So Leighton, Ince, Martin, Bruce, Phelan, Pallister, Robson, Webb, McClare, Hughes, Wallace, a strong team lining up. And it was the thing I remember first of all about this final was it was the first one post the Hillsborough disaster where seats had been put in at Wembley. And for the first 20 minutes, we hardly watched the match because our seats were directly behind the goal. But the first 30 rows, the seats had just been put onto the terrace steps you once stood on. And you were actually below the pitch. It wasn't so much a worm's eye view. You were actually below the pitch. You could just see a mass of legs. So people kept standing up. And that was the first time we came across what was a bit of a new phenomena there, which was stewards being very unsympathetic towards fans when they weren't causing any trouble. They were just barking at people to sit down when we couldn't see any of the action. Anyway, that wasn't helped 18 minutes in when I think it was Gary O'Reilly scored a header and put Palace 1 up. Anyway, things calmed down on the terraces a bit and they calmed down on the pitch. And 20 minutes in, about 35 minutes in, Palace held the lead for 17 minutes. Brian Robson headed an equaliser. Mark Hughes, who at this time was having had a superb season, was having a great game. Probably one of the few that really stood out in that first game against Palace. He put us 2-1 up just after the hour mark. And again, as the other lads have referred to in the earlier games, you thought, right, United have won it now. That's it. That'll see Palace off. But 20 minutes from time, Palace threw on a substitute who was a young striker hungry for glory. He'd broken his leg only about 6 or 4 weeks before the game, but wasn't fit to play, but was fit enough to be subbed. And within 2 minutes of coming on, a certain Ian Wright had pulled his team level up to 2-2. He ran rings round United's defence to score that goal. In the first period of extra time, because it finished up 2-2 at full time, Ian Wright struck again, this time volleying home to put Palace ahead. So blimey, from going from 2-1 up and thinking the cup's ours, we threw 3-2 down. Not only that, but we were looking tired, looking devoid of ideas. It looked like our league form came through. But there's certain people you can count on in a battle. Roy's already mentioned Brian Robson, and certainly I echo that. But in this era, Mark Hughes was a full-time warrior, and he summoned up his strength to save United with just 7 minutes left, with scoring a goal. He could battle a little bit like the way Haaland does now. Great strength, but also great poise and great ability to score goals. Anyway, he pulled it back to 3-3. It ended 3-3. I'd say Hughes saved that game, but nothing was ever a lost cause to Mark Hughes. He'd been the top scorer that season with 13 league goals, and now he'd rescued United's season again. And his brace at Wembley that day, it kept United's hopes alive of a cup. And also, I think by then, the threat of Fergie losing his job had gone. I think a semi-final or a final would have saved his job then. It was in the earlier rounds he was at risk. But he kept our hopes alive of getting our hands on some silverware.
Right. Let's take a look at the goals.
Thorne O'Reilly's in there, and was it over the line, and it's a goal. Wallace comes near post. Wallace. McClare. Robson. Goal! Brian Robson equalises for Manchester United after 35 minutes, and Captain Marvel is there again. Wallace. A ricochet. Hughes! 2-1 to Manchester United. And a devastating finish by Mark Hughes. Now here's Wright, his first chance to show what he can do. And he's through. It's Wright. Oh, what an impact by the substitute. It's 2-2. Wright! Goal! It's Ian Wright again. Palace are in front at 3-2. Webb to Wallace. Hughes goes through the middle, chance here for 3-3. Mark Hughes!
Right. So that was the first game of the final, and that set us up for a final replay at Wembley. And Roy, can you set that one up for us and take us through it?
Yeah, a Thursday night replay. Final United against Palace at Wembley. But the sensational news, of course, you've just seen there. I mean, Leighton arguably at fault with all 3 goals. I mean, even the Ian Wright first one was a shot which you'd expect a top-class goalie to have saved. But 2 crosses that were just... but a sensational start because Alec Ferguson took the bold step. And again, you know, we've been talking about Fergie's tenure. Full marks to him. He made big changes when he needed to, you know, to bring an unfit Robson and Webb back into the side, and then here unceremoniously dropping his ex-Aberdeen goalkeeper who'd won the league, the cup, European Cup Winners' Cup with him. But you know, could really have no excuse. He'd been very fair with him, to say the least, when you look at the entire run. And he gave it to the much-travelled Les Seeley. And we've got a little question about Les in a minute. But it was actually a story, this final, of 2 unsung heroes. Because Les Seeley was, on one way, a workmanlike, much-travelled goalkeeper. But he had that certain something about him that, you know, fans looked at and thought, I tell you what, that could be me, that sometimes. And the other unsung hero was United left back Lee Martin. You know, for Seeley, though, it proved a very correct decision because he certainly made 2 excellent saves at 0-0 in the first half. I mean, top class saves. He made 3 actually in the whole game, and he did give that sense of confidence that you just need with the goalkeeper to the back 4 and to the fans as well. But for Lee Martin to score the only goal was a credit to United's youth system. I'm saying here he's the only one of the 11 who had not cost a fee. I'm not quite sure about Les. I mean, Les had come to United on loan initially from Luton Town, and then we permanently signed him. So I'm not 100% certain whether we paid money. I suspect we would have done, but certainly Lee Martin, because Mark Hughes came through our youth system, but by the time we got to this final replay, he'd been in Barcelona, he'd been Bayern Munich, and he cost a bobber to come back to Old Trafford. I think it's been mentioned before. The other interesting one was the sight. I think it happened in the semi-final as well. Paul Ince playing as a right back for United there. As I say, Seeley made two really important saves in that first half. Whilst Neil Webb again was unlucky with a superb free kick. Then on 59 minutes, Webb produced this marvellous ball. In the old buggers who are listening to this thing, the old right half position virtually, and he hits this long ball 50 yards. And as he hits it, Lee Martin has been making this run from left back, and perfection. The ball falls to him, bit of a nudge down, and a finish of aplomb really for a fullback to put United in control with a half an hour goal to go. Seeley again made another fine save before fittingly, when the final whistle went, the ball was in Les Seeley's hands and he was kicking the ball down the middle of the pitch. A great end from him, a great decision by Ferguson, and United, I think, deserved to win that final. United then winners of the FA Cup for equal 7th time. And for Alex Ferguson, job secure. And, I wonder what the future would hold for him.
Yeah, indeed. Right, let's take a look at the goals from the final.
Webb. Lee Martin from left back, an inspired run on. Webb. Lee Martin from left back, an inspired run on the far side. A chance here, and a goal! What a tremendous run! And Manchester United have taken the lead, and Lee Martin made a run from left back that was, 40, 50 yards, took it on his chest and smashed it with his right foot past Nigel Martin, and after an hour's play, Manchester United are in front in the cup final because Andy Gray couldn't get to him, and it's the roof of the net. Manchester United have won the FA Cup and equalled the record of 7 outright wins. Palace slumped to the ground. Manchester United celebrate Alex Ferguson's first major trophy at Old Trafford, thanks to a goal by a home-produced player. He spent £13 million, and the lad who got the goal didn't cost a penny. The England captain outstanding.
Some of the new lads to the club who've took a lot of criticism this season, and it's just smashing for them to win something at the end of the day.
They've played 3 up front and I've been marking Andy Gray. So basically I was put to mark him for the game, and I just saw the space and ran into it, and it paid off.
It's fair to say that as well as being delighted, you're surprised.
Very surprised, very surprised.
So Lee Martin popping up with the goal. Tremendous stuff. FA Cup winners. Roger, thoughts on the final?
Yeah, I mean, I've got to pay thanks to Sir Alex here, really. I mean, he got a lot of flack during the 1990 season, but actually made all the big calls right just when he had to make them. He brought Neil Webb and Brian Robson back. He swapped Jim Leighton just at the right time for Les Seeley, when everybody, I think particularly around Old Trafford, had lost faith. I used to sort of alternate sometimes between going to a lot of away games, because I love away games, and then I went to a lot of home games this season. Didn't quite go to so many aways. But at Old Trafford, I felt it had got a bit eerie. And I just wonder, and I'll put this to you, Roy, do you think it actually helped in this cup run, actually playing away from home and not getting perhaps so much criticism?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree at all, Roger, on that. Although, in fairness to the United fans, I think I don't think they were open revolt against Fergie, and the displays just weren't good enough. You look on that picture there, who, by the way, the only person missing on that is Les Seeley, the goalkeeper, and hey, look at Milne there on the right. No, is that Colin Gibson or is it Milne? But you look at young Beardsmore there, but I mean, Ince cost a lot of money, Bruce cost a lot of money. Phelan cost a lot of money. McClare cost a lot of money. Danny Wallace cost a lot of money. Hughes cost a lot of money. Pallister cost a lot of money. Brian Robson, of course, had cost a lot of money, as had Neil Webb. So I think the United fans were, by now thinking, well, hang on a minute. You've got your full orchestra there now. Come on, leader, let's get it together. And it is no doubt that the whole cup run was pivotal, and I think it's quite eerie just to think what Pete had said there, that we only finished 5 points clear of the relegation with that side that you can see in front of them.
Indeed. Final word to you, Pete, on United's FA Cup victory.
Yeah, well, in itself, it was great to win the cup. Say we'd gone 5 years without a trophy. A trophy is always important. Even now, I think a trophy is important to the club. I know top four is important. I get that why it's important to get in the Champions League, but a supporter wants a trophy at the end of it. A day out at Wembley or at a final, hopefully coming home with some silverware. I'd have a trophy any time instead of finishing third or fourth. Now the younger generation might boo-hoo even if they care to listen, but we've got a trophy in our hands, so that was good. And I guess given the way how the season was, we couldn't have dreamed that, as Roy touched on. We couldn't have dreamed that season was so would turn out to have such a happy ending. It'd been an awful 9 months of a season, but it was great to get a trophy. It was great to get in the Cup Winners' Cup because the ban on English clubs were lifted shortly after that, and United and Villa went back in the following season. I think the ban on Liverpool was extended another couple of years, but so we were back in Europe as well. So it was happy days. But as time went on, of course, what it was. It was that trophy, winning a trophy, gave Fergie some time. It bought him time. It gave him a foothold at Manchester United that Wilf McGuinness and O'Farrell never got. Ollie never got it. It was, if you get your hands on a trophy, even if your side struggling, it buys you time with the supporters, with the managers, even with the press, really. And Fergie had got that. Now, we hoped he'd build on it, but my God, did he build on it? Obviously, it was wall-to-wall silverware for the next 23 years. But the funny thing is, United didn't start playing great right away. Everybody thinks Mark Robins scored that goal against Forest, and then we just started winning everything. It took another 2 years, really, before United got up to, before that team, the nucleus of that team, were able to put it into consistent league form. But in the meantime, Fergie also picked it up the Cup Winners' Cup the following season in that European campaign. That came out of a clear blue sky. United fans weren't expecting that. Won a League Cup, got close with the league, and then started winning the league and ended that 26-year drought. If for those that lived through it, so let me go with those that didn't live through it. It must seem difficult that we thought of getting rid of Fergie at one stage. It must sound daft that some guy stood up with a banner who's still going, saying that manager should go. I don't do those sort of things lightly. It felt disloyal to the club in a way, but I'd had my fill of Alex Ferguson as he was then, and so had many other United supporters. Many. Thank God the board didn't listen to us, or thank God for Mark Robbins' forehead and Danny Wallace's goals and McClare goals on that cup run. Because without that cup win and that foothold, who knows what our current situation would be. So well done, Fergie. And when he went off the pitch that night against Palace, got a huge applause from the United supporters as the team went off and Fergie went off after the lap of honour. I did, in my own head, say, okay, you've won yourself some time, Fergie. In my humble opinion, let's see what you can do with it now. And you've got a second chance. And my God, how he took that second chance.
Indeed, what a run it was. Well, that's our look at the 1990 FA Cup run. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Warwick Road Walk for all of our future and upcoming episodes. You can watch our past episodes as well by clicking on the link in our description. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks very much, chaps.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, folks. All the best.
Good to see you.